We are in our course on the top 25 most influential reformers of the 16th century. There, I got it all into one phrase. And we are on number 19 now, Andreas Karlstadt. So we have made our way through pretty much all the Anabaptists, so we won't be talking about Anabaptists much anymore in this course. Now we're getting into Lutherans and Reformed Church and the English Church and all that kind of stuff, which makes up the bulk of the rest of the list. So Andreas Karlstadt is kind of, in some ways, the forgotten man of the Reformation. I think he got I think he was treated poorly by Martin Luther, and his reputation suffered. I don't think it was especially fair, but if he's up there looking down now, he can take solace in the fact that I did mention him in my course.
You thought he was treated unfairly. I'm sure he was.
Somebody remembered him.
He's born 1486 in Karlstadt, Franconia, so he's a good German. Studies in 1499 at the University of Erfurt, and then in 1503 at the University of Cologne. So he's a very educated man, unlike, say, Thomas Munster or Melchior Hoffman, who were less well educated. 1510 he gets his doctorate of theology at the University of Wittenberg, and he of course will go on to fame, not fortune, but fame at Wittenberg. He's appointed archdeacon and the chair of the theology department, which is pretty significant if you think about what's about to happen in Wittenberg. 1511, the next year, he's appointed chancellor of Wittenberg University. This didn't work for me at HP. I mean, the year I joined HP, I was not made the CEO the next year. I don't know how it was for you.
Yeah, not so much.
Not so much. That's good work if you can get it.
He's only, what, 25 there?
Yeah.
Well, he went to university when he was 13.
Yeah.
Well, that was
Sheldon.
Goodness.
1512. If we had a soundtrack, this is where it would go dun 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 dun. 1512, he awards Martin Luther his doctorate at the University of Wittenberg. So you would think these two would be affably linked from that point on, and that was not to happen. 1515 to 1516, he goes on a sabbatical and studies canon law at the Sapienza in Rome. So this is a very learned guy. April 26, 1517, inspired by the corruption he found in Rome, and he would not be the first churchman to go to Rome and discover, gasp, corruption. Karlstadt nails his 151 Theses to the door of the Church of All Saints, or the Castle Church. And of course, they did not become as famous as someone else who would tackle.
Where's the Council Church?
That's Wittenberg.
Wittenberg.
Yeah, he's back from
He's
Rome
back. Right.
at this point. Sometime around 1518, he writes Scripturis, or Scripture in English, of course, and he declares the Apocrypha to be non-authoritative.
I'll bet that went over big.
So that would be one of the early influences on taking the Apocrypha.
There's Luther's first twitch.
1519, he has a Leipzig debate with Johann Eck, so now he is traveling around getting into debates with Catholic scholars, and of course holding his own. 1520, Luther and Karlstadt are almost excommunicated by Pope Leo X. This is when Leo X issues the bull of excommunication, but it has an expiration date on it, and the messengers bringing it to Wittenberg from Rome are kind of slow, and by the time they get there, it has expired. Luther, of course, burns the bull of excommunication in front of his cheering.
You have to wonder if those guys kept their job.
1520 would be another dun-da-dun in terms of the relationship between Karlstadt and Luther. Karlstadt criticizes Luther's rejection of the Book of James. Now, why didn't Luther like the Book of James? Well, Luther felt that we were justified by faith and faith alone. What does James say? It says faith without works is hollow. So Luther, what did Luther call the Book of James? A right straw-y epistle. A right straw-y epistle, I think were his exact words.
It's easier to say in German.
And Karlstadt said, no, I mean, James is as much a book of the New Testament as any other. You can't just take it out. Now this is right after Karlstadt had just ripped 12 books out of the Catholic Bible, so you have to look into that. 1521, Luther and Karlstadt are officially excommunicated, and to general cheering and excitement in Wittenberg among the students. Interestingly enough, in Giewalt, I'm no doubt pronouncing that wrong, Karlstadt denounces the use of force on behalf of the church, which is interesting because what he would later be accused of by Luther is that he was in favor of mobs trashing churches, and Karlstadt was never in favor of mobs trashing churches, ever. He also demands that all clergy be married, which is taking, of course, the opposite extreme from the Roman Catholic view. Now, I don't agree with that. I mean, if I was the Pope of Protestantism, I wouldn't demand that all ministers be married. But I understand the thought process. How can you minister to your flock if you never have the same experience, life experience they have? You know, family and grandchildren and whatnot. So I understand it. I wouldn't go that far. May to June 1521 helps establish the Danish National Church at the request of King Christian II. So once again, a little traveling there. These guys, one thing that hit me when I was writing this was some of these guys got around a lot more than I would have thought for 16th century. I mean, you know, look at Melchior Hoffman. I mean, he was on the road until they arrested him.
Look at Paul.
Yeah.
These people got around.
Yeah.
They did.
People have always gotten around.
Put
More
a
than
lot
we
of,
think they
put a lot of miles on
did.
their toes.
Yes, they did.
December 25th, 1521, he performs a thoroughly Protestant communion service in Wittenberg. And we should point out this is while Luther is in hiding in Wartburg Castle. So one of the things that's going to lead to this problem between the two of them, Luther is away in Wartburg, so that kind of puts Karlstadt in charge at Wittenberg. He makes certain decisions. Luther comes back, doesn't approve of the decisions, and that leads to the problem. 1522, he writes on the removal of images, which he is in favor of, removing them, I mean. So he's not in favor of these elaborate paintings and rideros and whatnot, statues in churches. January 1522, Wittenberg City Council authorizes the removal of statuary and other imagery from the churches in Wittenberg, and also officially approves Karlstadt's changes to the communion service. Well, remember, Luther's fighting the devil in Wartburg, and Karlstadt's running the show right now. January 19, 1522, marries Anna von Mockau. January 20th, 1522, Holy Roman Empire and the Pope orders Frederick the Wise, Elector of Saxony, to undo the communion changes. And Frederick complies, so Karlstadt's service is trashed at that point. March 1522, Luther returns from Wartburg Castle, and boy is he ticked off. He doesn't approve of anything that Karlstadt has done, even though a lot of it is stuff that you would think Luther would have approved of. But Luther didn't do it, therefore it wasn't worth doing. He preaches a series of 8 sermons in which he is, I put it, not fully supportive of Karlstadt and his reform. And remember, by this time, Luther has become almost a mythical figure. Mm-hmm. Luther has gone to Worms and stood 10 feet away from the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and said, "You're a poo-poo head." I mean, Luther is an international superstar by this point, and the students are, you know, they just go crazy when Luther returns, which probably would take Karlstadt on. March 12, 1522, Karlstadt speaks out against icons of the Virgin Mary, so he continues on that theme, all this worshiping relics and statuary. It smacks of worshipping idols. 1523, disavows intercession of the saints. Why are you praying to saints? They're dead people. May 1523, becomes pastor at the Orlamunde and Thuringia, and institutes reforms more in line with Zwingli than Luther. He also strips the churches there of all ornamentation takes a spiritual view of communion, removes music from the services, etc. Well, now Luther and him essentially are enemies now.
Much more aligned with Calvin.
Much more aligned with Calvin, the taking the music out of the services, and et cetera, et cetera. Remember, Luther didn't start out to start a new denomination. He's a Catholic who wants to reform the Catholic Church. So all the bells and whistles and smells and all that, Luther, he wanted to keep. All Karlstadt did. Let's see, 1524 to 25, the Peasants' War in Germany, in which 100,000 plus peasants are killed. This is Thomas Münster leading his 8,000 peasants, his army in Münster, or not in Münster. Frankenhausen, I think is the name of the town. Under threat, Karlstadt hides first in Rothenburg on the Tauber and then in Wittenberg. There is no evidence whatsoever that Karlstadt supported the peasants' revolt. Luther blamed the peasants' revolt on Karlstadt, said it was all his fault. And where Luther got there, and I'm not saying this is a good logic, but Luther got there with this. Luther is all for rideros and statuary and whatnot in the churches. He's Catholic. Karlstadt's not in favor of those things. Karlstadt's more Zwinglian and doesn't think we should have all that stuff. The Peasants' War, one of the things they do is they go into Catholic churches, and what do? They rip out the statuary and the rideros and all that stuff. So in Luther's mind, it's all Karlstadt's fault that these unruly mobs that Karlstadt has nothing to do with whatsoever, that these unruly mobs are going into churches and trashing them. So Luther, Luther believes Karlstadt is at fault in all of this stuff.
Karlstadt's an easy target for him.
Yeah. Let's see. Spring 1524, Luther speaks out against Karlstadt the first time and really turns it into a war. June 1524, Karlstadt resigns as the archdeacon of the University of Wittenberg. August 1524, he writes several treatises on communion, one on baptism where he disavows infant baptism. You can imagine how well that goes over with Luther. Meets with Conrad Grebel and Felix Mons in Zurich. Here I had said we weren't going to talk about the Anabaptists anymore, but they will keep popping up from time to time, and there they are. August 22nd, 1524, a showdown at the Black Bear Inn in Jena between Luther and Karlstadt, in which Luther continues to accuse Karlstadt of advocating violence, something which Karlstadt never actually did. And we actually have some of the text of this great debate, and we're going to, one of you gets to be Luther, one of you gets to be Karlstadt. Or if I can only get one of you to want to talk, I could take one of the pieces.
We got two men here. I don't know how to get John to this.
September 1524, he's exiled from Saxony by Frederick the Wise and George, Duke of Saxony, and he flees to South Germany and Switzerland. Now, why does he have to flee? Because of Frederick the Wise and George, Duke of Saxony? They're the only reason the Protestant Reformation has worked in Germany is because Luther had the secular armies and the secular princes on his side. So when they go against you, you're toast. Unless you got the Holy Roman Emperor on your side, you're toast at that point. September 5th, 1524, Anabaptist co-founder Conrad Grebel writes approvingly of Karlstadt in a letter to Münster. Again, all this is stuff that's going to annoy Luther no end. 1526, Luther again targets Karlstadt and the sacrament of the blood, the body and blood of Christ against the fanatics. He lumps Karlstadt in with the fanatics. Remember, this is the guy who gave him his doctorate. This is the guy who together they created the Protestant Reformation in Germany. 1529, composes dialogues with Melchior Hoffman and Holstein on the trial of Hoffman in Flensburg. So Karlstadt, by this point, really has left his roots in with Luther and Wittenberg. 1534, appointed minister of the University Church in Basel, and professor of Hebrew and dean of the university. So he's back on his professional fast track here. And December 24th, 1541, he dies in Basel of bubonic plague. So notice where he ends up. He ends up in Switzerland because the reformers in Switzerland all love him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not getting a lot of love from Luther anymore.
Well, as you said, Luther didn't want to leave the Catholic Church. He was more of a Puritan than he was a Pilgrim. Karlstadt was a Pilgrim. This is a bunch of nonsense. But Karlstadt was Luther's big rival. He's the one that really could have put a huge dent in Lutheranism.
Especially,
had he stayed there.
especially intellectually.
Yes, because he could compete.
He was the
He
guy
easily
who could
compete.
go
Head to head.
head on. There's no
So, what Luther really did was annihilate his
I was
competition.
gonna say, in order to push myself forward, I'd have to knock down my
Yes,
biggest
it's really what he
zero
did.
sum game.
Yeah,
We can't both be successful. In order for one to be successful, you have to destroy the other.
that's right. And that's exactly what he did.
Karlstadt's very German. He's not quite Luther, although he's kind of associated more with Lutheranism than he is with the Reformed faith. He rejected imagery in churches, accepted Zwingli's views on the Eucharist, so he's not really Lutheran. He's not quite an Anabaptist, although they all loved him. He rejected infant baptism. But on the other hand, he didn't re-baptize people who'd been baptized as children, so that was a key distinction. He didn't believe in re-baptizing. He just said, let's stop the practice of infant baptism. So he didn't go as far as the Anabaptists did. He's not quite Reformed. He rejected predestination, and he especially rejected double election, which wasn't so much Zwingli. That really was, I think we can all agree, was Calvin's, what Calvin brought to the table in the predestination discussion. So he fit in everywhere and nowhere in the Reformation, and as often happens, people who fit in everywhere and nowhere end up getting attacked by everyone and no one. But in his case, it was really the attacks from Luther that mattered. He was accepted by the Anabaptists. He was accepted by the Zwinglians. His greatest battles were with Luther, even though they started out as allies. Karlstadt actually gave Luther his doctorate at Wittenberg. But during Luther's exile at Wartburg, Karlstadt continued to preach in Wittenberg and developed a view of the Eucharist that was closer to Zwingli than to Luther. Karlstadt approved of the removal of statuary and other imagery in churches. And there's a couple movies on Martin Luther. There's one made in 56, 57, and then there's the other one with Joseph Fiennes that came out just a few years ago. And the one that was made back in the 50s, it really is unfair to Karlstadt, because what it shows is Luther returns from Wartburg, and it shows Karlstadt egging on the peasants who then go in and trash a Catholic church. Well, as you saw on the timeline, there was a gap of like 3 years between when Luther returned and when the Peasants' War broke out. So Karlstadt really has been...
Don't let the facts get in the way.
yeah, don't let the facts get in the way of this.
Yeah.
When Luther returned from Wartburg, he denounced Karlstadt's church reforms and also his view on the Eucharist. Luther would unfairly accuse Karlstadt of supporting violence against churches to force them to remove their statuary and imagery, something which Karlstadt never advocated. The more Luther castigated Karlstadt, the closer Karlstadt got to the Anabaptists and the Zwinglians, as often happens. If the people I used to think were my friends keep dissing me, and the people I thought were my enemies are come, welcome, eventually I'm going to come. Rivalry came to a head with a showdown at the Black Bear Inn. Isn't it great? Showdown at the Black Bear Inn. You could write a whole history of Protestantism with that as the title, couldn't you? Isn't this great?
You could make a movie, a Western. with the same title.
August 22nd, 1524, in Thuringia, Germany, is where this great debate happens. It was set up because Luther had seemingly accused Karlstadt of advocating violence in a sermon given at 7 o'clock that morning. So Luther had got up in the town where, Karlstadt is, and preaches a sermon where he accuses Karlstadt of initiating violence. Well, what are you going to do if you're Karlstadt? Are you going to let it stand? Karlstadt hadn't done anything. So Karlstadt then goes to Luther's lodging to call on him. Knock, knock, knock. And this starts the great debate. So to sort of set it up, Karlstadt complained that Luther had put him in the same catalog with seditious and murderous spirits, and that he had said that the murderous spirit at Allstadt and the spirit which broke the images and laid bands upon the sacrament were one and the same spirit. That the spirit at Allstadt had nothing in common with his doctrine of the sacrament, that no one after the apostles had taught of the subject as he had done, adopting the same manner of views and arguments. Luther replied that he had not made the least mention of anyone, especially not of Karlstadt, but that if he considered it as applying to himself, he might apply it to himself in the name of God, after they had sharply conferred with one another. The following dialogue took place. So, it's the kind of thing where you give a sermon and you give somebody's social security number and their driver's license number and you show a picture of them behind you, but then later you say, I didn't mention anybody by name. I never mentioned somebody's name. So that's basically what happened. Okay, do we have a volunteer for Luther and a volunteer for Karlstadt? Because the dialogue here, this is one of the great debates of all time. This is as if Socrates and Plato had gone against each other. So do we have any volunteers? Who wants to do it?
You have to volunteer. You and Robert have to do it.
I'll read.
So we should do it?
Yep. Where am I coming to stand up?
Well, just get a little closer maybe. So do you want to be Luther or Karlstadt?
That doesn't matter.
Well, that's
I'll be Karlstadt.
Okay.
But what I really want people to focus on is the high intellectual content of this debate. That's what I want you to focus on. Okay, Luther.
You are, after all, on the side of the new prophets.
As far as they have right and truth on their side, as far as they are in the wrong, let the devil side with them.
Write against me openly and not clandestinely.
If I were assured that you are so anxious for it, you might have your wish.
Only do so.
It shall be done.
Do so. I will present you a florin for the purpose.
It's like tossing somebody a nickel or something. It shall be done. Oh, a florin?
If I don't do so, call me a knave.
Give it to me then, and I shall verily accept it.
Here's a quarter, call someone who cares.
I need a narrator.
Luther accordingly put his hand into his pocket, and drawing forth a gold florin, he gave it to Karlstadt and said, "Take it, and only boldly assail me. Don't spare." Karlstadt took the florin, and holding it up to all present, said,
Dear brethren, that is a rabo, or money taken on account. A token that I am authorized to write against Dr. Luther, and I pray you all to be witnesses for me.
There is no need of it.
And Karlstadt bent it and put it in his purse, reached his hand to Dr. Luther, and Dr. Luther toasted him, and Karlstadt, returning the compliment, said,
Doctor, I pray you therefore not to prevent me from printing, neither to cause me any persecution or hindrance as to my livelihood, for I intend to maintain myself with the plow, and whatever the plow shall yield, you no doubt will learn.
How should I wish to prevent you when I desire you to write against me? And I gave you the florin as evidence that you are not to spare me, and the more boldly you attack me, the better I shall be pleased with you.
The court preacher, Wolfgang Stein, who had accompanied Luther on his journey, said to Karlstadt, "The doctor shall not prevent you from gaining your livelihood, nor do you any injury." Upon which Karlstadt said, "Well then, if I miss you, it shall be my damage." Thus Karlstadt returned home, and Martin, having preached, afterwards drove to Kalle.
I think that is brilliant. I had arguments like that in the 6th grade on the playground. Isn't that great? Here's the two greatest minds of the 16th century, the two greatest theologians of the 16th century, and they finally meet for this great debate. And what do? They sound like two sixth graders arguing over a basketball.
Well, Karlstadt's throwing a slight at Luther, because Karlstadt's the one that gave him his doctorate, right? So, Dr. Luther.
Yeah, Dr. Luther. Yeah. Yeah. I just think that was marvelous when I saw it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. Nanny, nanny, nanny.
It is one of the debates of the ages. I mean, wow. Karlstadt was also a prolific writer. He wrote around about 90 works in his lifetime. So, to sum up, Karlstadt was brilliant. Certainly every bit as brilliant as Luther. I think he was mistreated by Luther. I think there was personal jealousy involved. And I wanted to bring him out to modern audiences.